Hi, thanks for joining us. My name is Alexander Lawrence, and this is the Sysdig Slice. We're here to talk about pizza, and we're here to talk about cybersecurity. Those two things together are hopefully things you both love. I'll have a few folks with me today, both David and John. I just want to say a quick shout out to our sponsors at AWS. Sysdig plus AWS together gives us a much more robust security solution, as well as moving things at the speed of the cloud. And speaking of things that go fast, let's have a few questions for our guests today. Why don't we start with a little bit about you guys? So if you could, in less than, say, 30 seconds, tell me about yourself, John.
Jon Staniforth. I've been in technology for about 30 years, 20 of them doing cyber stuff, worked across a lot of sectors, both globally and sort of nationally, most recently Mail CISO.
Okay, very, very cool. David.
I've been in technology for over 30 years. I'm not going into more detail than that. Worked mainly at software vendors, but I had a brief stint as a technology director at a large multinational corporation.
Wonderful, wonderful. If you had one wish, what would you do in cybersecurity? Like, how would you use that wish?
Unlimited budget.
Unlimited budget. I think a lot of folks would agree with that.
I would have a magic wand that helps CEOs, CFOs, and other executives understand a bit more about technology and how it's and cyber now really are fundamental to their business, whatever sector they're in.
Okay, next one. And your favorite pizza topping?
Just plain cheese.
Just plain cheese. You are a Brit, aren't you?
I am. Yes.
Yeah.
Pepperoni.
Pepperoni, man of my own heart. Love it. Maybe a little bit of onions?
No, a little bit of chili flakes on top.
Chili flakes. Interesting. Okay, so favorite beer to go with a pizza?
A nice Dutch white beer.
Dutch white beer.
Any beer is good, but I've got into the habit of a Pabst Blue Ribbon back home.
Blue Ribbon.
PBR, yeah.
PBR. I would never imagine David to be a PBR drinker.
I've lived in the States for a long time.
Yeah, that's very clear now. Cool. So what about, you've got your beer, you've got your pizza, you're kind of sitting back. What's that song going through your head? Sweet Home Alabama for you, it sounds like, or what?
I'm quite partial to Imagine by John Lennon.
Imagine by John Lennon. Okay.
And I'm going with the Christmas theme, so I'm going Pogues, Fairy Tale of New York.
Fairy Tale of New York. Okay. Get on board with that. All right, let's see. How about one more pizza-related question here before we move on? Cornicione. What is that?
No idea.
No
idea.
Come on, explain.
It's the outside perimeter of your pizza, the thing that's nice and fluffy
with
all
I
the
like
holes.
The thin crust, that's why I don't know.
Oh, the thin crust guy. All right.
There we go.
Well, you can still have a thin crust and have a nice little fluffy cornicione around that edge, That's where all those delicious bubbles are. So you don't want to mess with that too much. We'll see that today as we go further along.
Cool.
Very interesting. We learned something.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so we're going to start our pizza now, and the perfect pizza starts with the perfect base, right? Just like in cybersecurity, you have a foundation of things that you're going to do to make sure everything builds upon that and that you can have a good outcome. I think we'd all agree that if we start with a base that is weak or is loose or soupy or however you want to put it, you're going to have things that just fall through the cracks. You're not going to have a good time. I'm going to start making a pizza crust, and while I'm doing that, I'll be kind of bouncing some questions off you guys so we can keep these folks at home entertained. So I'm going to start with a little bucket, and I'm going to add in a bunch of water. And after this, we're going to throw in some yeast. So this is the kind of the foundation of our pizza crust, right? This is what gives it that nice airy taste, makes it be that thing we're used to when it comes to pizza. So if we think about kind of the beginning of all these things, John, you've set up cybersecurity at a number of different companies. How do you kind of figure out what the right scope is, and how do you apply the right approach to that company when you're just starting out?
So the main thing is to try and understand what that company's objective is, what's the business trying to do. From that, what key processes really matter, whether it's how they're driving revenue, how they're meeting their regulatory obligations, how they operate the business. So to try and get that enough information from interviewing people, typically outside of IT as well as within technology. then trying to find out what's your baseline of controls or regulations, or what do you have to do as a minimum. And then it's basically using that information to help feed your risks. So what are your threats, whether it's at one level, threat attack groups using tools like MITRE, or whether it's more you're an availability focused business, you're worried about sort of ransomware and things, or you're more a data privacy focused business. So it's understanding that side of the business, and then you can start thinking, once you've baselined what the company's trying to achieve, you can start to look at what tools and products do technology have already in place, what's the maturity of the business, what's the maturity of the cyber team. Because it's really hard to apply cyber to a company that's not quite ready for it. Mm-hmm. So that's basically starts to set out your foundations.
Okay, so clearly we're making this pizza from a recipe, and clearly you have a fairly good recipe defined about how you're going to go through all those various subjects and talk to all those different people. Talk to me a little bit more about kind of the specifics therein. Like, give me the top 3 things you start diving into as you're talking to all these folks, getting used to what the organization's ready for.
What are the key ways of a company making money? Mm-hmm. That might be based on not just their business processes, but their locations in the world, their product set. So what's that part? What are the regulatory obligations, which obviously things like GDPR in Europe and privacy is one side, but they might be regulated by one or more regulators. They might have US SOX, they might have financial services regulations, because that gives you part of the scope. And then what are the key things they need to operate? So for instance, in a very large company, payroll is really important, because otherwise you may have 100,000 people. How do you pay them if that system goes down? So you've got to really look at those sort of 3 aspects. How does a company operate? How does it make money? And what's it obligated to do?
Okay, no, makes sense. So I've got about half this dough mixed in here, and I want to kind of, make it be kind of less goopy, right? This is certainly a fun stage, but we got to add some more substance to it. So David, from your perspective, can you expand on that a little bit? What do you kind of see as understanding the risks? How do you kind of help prompt those things? How do you really get into kind of those niche details so you can start kind of giving more meat to the plan there?
I run the business value practice at Sysdig, so we're all around quantification and measuring, right? You can't manage what you don't measure. So I think having metrics associated with all of the things you talk about, if we need to do A, B, and C, how do we measure how well we're doing A, B, and C? And that then helps you align to, hey, am I meeting those goals? Am I meeting those deliverables? And then especially if you're looking to invest in a new technology or hire people or make some sort of investment, you've got metrics that can show, hey, I need to move metric A from point X to point Y, and this next investment I'm going to make is going to help me do that. It helps with the justification, then it also helps measure whether you're being successful or not. So I think defining the metrics that align to everything that John said around what your objectives are is really critical. A lot of times I think in terms of analogies, and I apologize, my analogies are terrible, but if you think about sort of home security, right? I have a couple of Wi-Fi cameras, I have some sensors on the doors that tells if I've left the door open or if somebody opens a door when I'm away. And that's all. I don't have an alarm system, I don't have a monitoring system, because I don't need one. If I was a famous actor, famous politician, if I had a very expensive art collection, clearly there's a need there to have a little more than I have at my house. You're going to need maybe a security wall with barbed wire on the top, 24-hour armed guard security, that type of thing. So it's all around kind of understanding what your objectives are.
No panic room?
I don't have a panic room, no.
Oh.
Other than running outside and running away. Having those objectives then helps you understand kind of the expense, as we were saying before, budget. Unlimited budget would be great, but you need to sort of be very cognizant of where your investments are going. And unless you know what the objectives are, it's very difficult to justify those investments.
Gotcha. Yeah, so clearly you can tell that on our pizza dough, we're on the right track. We're less goopy. We're getting more consistency here. So what about that same concept as you're building your cybersecurity program? You've talked to the people, you've interviewed them, you've started putting metrics in place, you're measuring things. How do you know you're on the right track? John, we'll start with you.
So you're typically trying to align that whole program with what the business is trying to do themselves. And the reality is, it's often about the least worst choice, not the best choice in cybersecurity, because we all realise after all these years that we can't fix everything. So if your business is trying to do a cloud transformation and digitize more, you might choose to leave the risk on your legacy on-prem stuff behind and be working with technology on what's going on. Now, as the landscape changes, which is, a new 0-day comes out on an iPhone, you might have to go, can I afford to accelerate that piece of work, or do I have to go backwards and readjust the program? So some of it is that iterative, the data points measuring, but it's also the external factors. The company might do a merger and acquisition and might buy another organization. That could change your profile. So I think you've got to have a thematic, this is where we're going based on today's threats and risks, and these are our investment programs, many of which you want to do in stages, but you've also got to be dynamic enough that if the business switches direction, some external factor happens, whether it's a technical one or some of the more geopolitics ones, that you can actually sort of switch on and off parts of your program and explain that.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Anything to add?
Yeah, I think when you're defining a measurement program, I think things are not sort of point in time, right? Things always change. And to your point, the business may change in ways that you know about. It may change in ways that you had no way of knowing about. But I think having that sense of this is where I am today, this is where I want to go, I like thinking in threes. So I think in terms of kind of a measurement program, I think today, what do we want to measure today to say we're successful? What is sort of an attainable next phase, whatever that might be, and kind of how do we transition to that? And then there's sort of a little bit of an aspirational future state, where you can say, well, we kind of want to be there. Maybe it's that transition from on-premise to a fully digital cloud-based organization. You might never actually get there, but that's okay. That's the direction you're going in. So at least have an idea of the steps you want to take along the way and how the programs that you have are going to need to evolve. You're going to need to course correct, but at least having that in your mind about, hey, I'm going to put stuff in place today, but it's absolutely not set in stone. It is going to change, and having the flexibility and the adaptability to grow with that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, just like this dough here, right? We had something that was goopy. We got into a little bit more of a spot, and now we're in a kneading phase, right? It's still not ready yet. It looks pretty okay. It's formed.
The goopy metrics are looking very good with that.
The goopy metrics are looking very good.
It's definitely an improvement.
But how do we go with our team on this, right? So I'm going to be kneading this for almost 10 minutes. In the business world, we don't go quite that fast. But maybe over, let's say, the next 2 to 3 years, how do you know your teams are working on the right things? How are they kind of kneading through the dough of cybersecurity, so to speak?
I think it's that iteration of the journey that Dave and I were talking about. Is you've got a direction. You may be building out different elements of your team. So I've worked in organisations where I've literally started as me as the only person. So you then start to say, well, am I going to prioritise building out a SOC or business engagement or a cultural awareness program? So you've got to be looking at those different elements of the program and where you are. And then in a global organisation, as Dave said, you've got this long-term, medium to long-term directional where you're going, but I worked in an organisation where in India and Philippines the priority was availability because of electrical outages, lots of generators, lots of UPS systems, lots of protection around physical security, whereas in sort of the US at the time it was very much PCI compliance and US SOCs. So your program also have to have different swim lanes which go alongside maturing cyber, but also alongside maturing the business as well. Because if the business is a startup, their focus is going to be on getting product out the door at a certain lens, and it's not necessarily going to be cyber as their top priority. Mm-hmm. If you've got another type of more mature company in a regulated environment, then they might actually be, we've got to do the regulations, we're going to get beaten up by the regulator, and they might have to offset that with some of the more generic risk elements. And it's trying to tie those pieces together.
David?
Yeah, I think there's, we talk about not all metrics really are created equal. A great example I always give is vulnerability management, right? Anyone who develops software is going to have vulnerabilities. From now until the end of time, we will all have vulnerabilities in our code, and probably lots of them. So the easy thing to measure is how many vulnerabilities do I have? That's a great starting point. But as you mature a security program, the number of vulnerabilities is always going to go up and down. You're going to fix a load, someone's going to come out with a load more, it'll go up again, it'll come down. The day before Log4j, we may have all thought, hey, we've got a really good handle on our vulnerability program, and all of a sudden the world fell apart the next day, right? So absolute number is maybe not the best metric. So what you want to start looking at is how quickly am I fixing the ones that I care about? How well am I prioritizing the ones that I care about? So the metrics you use to measure the effectiveness of your program do change over time. That raw number of vulnerabilities, maybe that's a great place to start, but as you grow your processes, as you grow more mature, there are different ways of measuring different aspects of it, and being aware of that and having the ability to kind of adjust those metrics as you go along, I think is an important part of it as well.
Makes sense. So as these programs mature, what would you say is the hardest thing to deal with?
I think a lot of people are still linking this to a one-off project. So many technology projects produce a product. You're building a new CRM tool, you're migrating to the cloud, etc. And I think we're still in an era of you can spend some money on cyber and deliver component projects, but actually it's this continuum. And that's because the world gets worse, businesses change, criminals are focused on where the money is. Take your industrial engineering stuff, plant that didn't used to have digital interfaces, now they've got them. So I think it's how do you keep that maintenance of it's not over and that continuum. And linking to the point on vulnerabilities, that's just one aspect. But think of the wider. We're now in the world of AI and quantum, and many of the fundamental controls aren't that much different, but they might be going at a different pace. We have to think of better ways of integrating cyber into people's lives. I think the industry itself has taught people about phishing links, but similar, I'm an analogy person, similar to cars, you can now walk away from your car and it'll automatically lock itself, or you can use your finger or your phone. How do we build cyber in so that we're not trying to teach people to spot a dodgy email? If they click on the link, it doesn't matter. And I think that's the next evolution of tools and technologies that we need to.
Yeah, I'd argue that securing the human is the hardest thing to do, right? This human seems to always be the lowest hanging fruit access point.
It does, but I think we've got to stop blaming the human, and there's a danger with that communication, I think. So an accountant's come to work to be an accountant. A marketing person's come to be a marketing person. We've got to blend cyber in much better than we have historically, so it's just part of their life.
No, makes perfect sense.
I think just to pick up on something that John said, we the perspective on risk, as technology people, we're very kind of black and white, very binary, literally, right? And security and risk is not like that, right? You, as you said, you deliver a technology project, you deliver a release of software, it is now done, it's checked off. Risk and cybersecurity is not like that, and it's very easy as technologists to fall into that perspective that, when I deliver this solution, I'm done. Well, you're not, you're never done. There's always new risks coming along. There's always, attackers are trying to find new ways. Random things will come out of left field. Maybe it's something fairly benign like an acquisition or a merger that we may not have anticipated, or maybe it's some geopolitical event that nobody could have seen coming, or some sort of natural disaster, or something like that. COVID, right? There were many security implications of COVID. So I think that sort of inherent sort of dissonance between the way we as technology people tend to think in the very black and white binary world, and the fact that risk is on a scale, that's something that I think we always need to think about.
For sure. Well, I think we've got a pretty good base going here. We can let this rise for a little bit. So I appreciate those insights on how you kind of build out that security program. And I think the next step up for us is to move more into the sauce, like kind of the operations, more of that stuff. So
okay,
let's go ahead and do that next. All right, so we have our perfect base. We've got it where we want it. I'm going to go ahead and finish this off. And while I'm doing that, let's start talking about sauce. What is your favorite sauce? And what are your favorite ingredients that make up that perfect sauce?
I mean, obviously a standard tomato sauce is my go-to. I do like a white pizza. That works well in some situations.
An Alfredo guy.
Yeah, sort of an Alfredo with a clam and white pizza. I do have to give a shout out to some pizza establishments in Connecticut where they do a hot oil pizza, which is basically a basic pizza with olive oil that's been sort of had hot peppers marinated in it. So it's not really a sauce, but it's an accoutrement to the main sauce.
Okay. John?
I'm pretty basic as well in terms of tomato, oregano, and olive oil in the core sauce. I'm a bit of a cheat. If I do a homemade one, I tend to get a baguette and put ketchup on it as the base, and then put stuff on top of that as a little.
Did you just say ketchup?
Like a baguette pizza, the cheap pizza.
Okay.
10 minutes, baguette, ketchup, toppings.
I'm not sure you can stay in that seat after hearing that. I mean, I could get on board with marinara, but ketchup?
No, clams on pizza doesn't work. It's as bad as pineapple.
I think ketchup out controversials pineapple on pizza. I'm not sure. I don't know.
So I'm going to take this. We got this nice little rise going on. We're going to put this over off screen for a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and start grabbing everything else for the sauce, some garlic, some other things, and we'll kind of start jumping into making that.
Cool.
Great.
All right, so we're here to make some sauce. I think it's a pretty good analogy between making some sauce, putting a sauce together, and getting the right people, right? There's a lot of flavors, there's a lot of ingredients that all kind of mix together. So I'm gonna start doing this process. And while I'm doing that, John, you've put together a number of teams. Can you tell me a little bit about what goes into making an efficient and effective teams?
Yeah, I think it's understanding that strategy and what you're trying to achieve first. Understanding then how you're going to source it. Are you going to use a combination of outsourcing, insourcing? Are you going to leverage other teams in the company, whether it's technology or privacy or other areas? And that helps you figure out the type of people, skills you want to go for. Also, we talked before about whether you get a mature team because your risk position is such you need to accelerate your cyber program, or whether you've got time to grow. And that will help you understand whether you're getting sort of people in the early stage of their career that you're developing, or whether you're going straight to market because you need to have the urgency from experience. So that's the sort of first part. And then looking at the team makeup and the target operating model, you know, the team structure. So you've got different personalities needed, for instance, for cultural awareness and consulting engagement with the rest of the business, to maybe analysts and very heavy technical architects, which is again different to people who are doing sort of audit and governance and so on. So you've really got to start to understand the makeup before you even, I'll say, go to market. Once you've done that, you can start to look at how you're getting people. You're going to go direct, you're going to use agencies, you're going to go to recruitment fairs or combinations of, and then really be honest with people about where you are. So there's no point in trying to bring someone from a very mature organisation into a startup unless they really understand that's going to happen, or else you're going to get a massive culture clash, you're going to get a massive disappointment. And I think the key thing when you're hiring people is just be honest with where you are, what you can give them to develop them in their career. Don't blag it, and what you're trying to achieve, and try and get a match.
So what's more important? Is it culture or is it ability?
Back to where I said it depends. Culture is really important, but if you've got an ability need in the short term, you might choose a different sourcing strategy. So you might pull in some consultants, or you might bring your tool vendor in to do something to get yourself over that sort of initial capability gap. But ultimately, the cultural fit is really important. Instead of someone from a heavily regulated environment going to an unregulated, has to be aware. I'm not saying they can't do it. It's basically being aware before they start the job, so there's no mismatch.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. David, you work with a lot of security leaders around a various number of projects. You know, what do they tell you about their teams? How do you support their teams? Kind of what have you heard in that process?
I think burnout is a very common theme. You know, I think the nature of working in a security environment is it can be pretty stressful and intense. I think not just the actual workload itself, but you know, when you think about what somebody who's a security practitioner is doing, they're protecting the entire organization. You know, and if you miss something on an investigation, or you know, you think something's not a real threat when it actually is, there can be massive consequences, which I think can lead to a lot of stress and burnout. So being aware of that and having a plan in place to mitigate it is important. You know, we spend a lot of time when we're talking to security leaders understanding the time that people spend on various activities, and what we try and do is prioritize spending time on activities that are much more value add and much more important to the organization, but also to the individual, right? If you're spending a lot of your day on routine, mundane activities that are the same the day in, day out, you're going to get pretty sort of disillusioned with the role more quickly. Whereas if you're working on interesting, transformational topics, it's a lot more rewarding, right? Which can obviously offset that burnout. So just kind of understanding and recognizing that it can be a really stressful environment, and as a leader, you want to make sure that you're taking care of your people and making sure that you're not burning them out, because if they do, you can put all this effort into building the team, hiring the right resources, and they may love the job, they may love the organization, but if they're feeling burned out, they're going to move, they're going to leave, they're going to go somewhere else, and you're going to have to do it again, right? And I think I've heard some statistics that there's, I think they said it's like 0% or zero unemployment in the security world, because there's something like 4 jobs for every person that's looking. There's a lot of other security roles out there, and if you're not taking care of your people, the attrition could be a big risk, and that puts a lot back on the leader, because now they've got to backfill that really experienced role. But it hurts the organization, because there's a lot of experience walking out the door to a different organization.
Absolutely. So I'm kind of smashing this up, right? Trying to get this to be a little more saucy. And so speaking of things that are saucy, do you have any good stories you can tell me?
You can go first.
Yeah, you can go first.
Too many, as most of my teams will tell you. I think the cyber spectrum, obviously everyone loves to hear about the big incidents, because that's part of human nature. Is, look at all our newspapers, look at what's on the news, it's all the negatives. I think the positives also come out though, is one of my best experiences was actually writing policies with the technology teams in an organization. And policy sounds boring on day one. You can imagine the looks on people's faces, but I was like, well, we're going to adjust the policies to things that make sense for you. So I'm a great believer in real policies that reflect life. And the look of amazement on people's faces. And I said, look, as long as we're keeping the underlying theme, I don't care what the words are. So we actually ended up with a working group from all the different squads and tribes that were involved. And then about 6 months later, after we'd agreed this, people were putting in, the deal was any function could come and challenge the policy. Yeah, because if it didn't work or wasn't readable, then how would the devs know what to do, or how would the other people? In this, one of the areas came in and said, we want to change this part. The other teams, before anyone in security could say anything, myself included, defended the policy and said they put so much effort into that, and they'd show this other team how to actually achieve the objective. And that to me was, in a nice way, a pleasing, really fun story, because basically it meant that adoption was happening and people felt they owned something. Whereas many companies, the policies are sort of slapped in your face, and you can't change
having it be flexible definitely is a little bit abnormal, that's for sure.
I think on the subject of ownership, I was talking to a customer recently, and they said that there's typically, if you look between security and development, there's sort of butting heads, right? Developers want to develop and build new things, and not that they don't care about security, but security is often perceived as sort of being a roadblock and slowing things down. And what they've done is, through an education program, through including the developers, what they've done was actually tap into this kind of desire that a developer wants to do something cool and accomplish something, and take a lot of pride in their work and build some new capability that works, and when it's deployed, it's bug-free. And they were able to insert security vulnerabilities as part of that pride. So they essentially culturally influence the developers to care about security by sort of building in this metric of, hey, not only did I deploy a piece of code that did something cool and new and drove X% growth in our customer base, but it was had zero security vulnerabilities as well. So I thought that was a kind of an interesting way of leveraging the culture of a particular team to kind of to achieve a shared objective.
No, it makes perfect sense. So I think we're good and mixed here. We got all we needed to go here in this spot. Everybody has kind of like their favorite thing that goes into a sauce, right? Like for me, I gotta love that garlic. Kind of no such thing as too much garlic in a sauce, right? Yeah. When it comes to people though, what's the one characteristic that you think is most important to look for when you're hiring someone?
Curious people.
Curious.
So cyber is, so it doesn't matter in your personality type, and you want a big mix of personalities. It doesn't matter whether you're neurodiverse or not. It's more, are you curious? Because it's understanding the business, it's understanding technology, it's understanding people at one end, or understanding data analytics at the other. So for me, that, if I have one word, it's curious.
David?
I think I'm having a hard time focusing because that smells really good. No, I think that's a great point. Curious. There's always something different happening. Unlike a lot of IT disciplines where it's pretty defined and operationally and process defined, security by its nature is very different. So I think that's a really good point. That,
I agree.
You want people that are curious and think differently, and I think diversity plays into it as well, right? Somebody at a conference recently had mentioned that in security, especially, diversity is as important as elsewhere, but in many cases it's more important, because that's how you get that think differently, bring a different perspective to the organization. Is people with different backgrounds have different perspectives on life, and they're going to bring their own perspective to security.
No, absolutely. Creativity is kind of the number one thing, right? We can teach tech, but we can't teach creativity.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think your point about neurodiverse people is really important for the defenders, because it's been demonstrated that lots of the threat actors, the attackers, actually have a wide range of people, and even from young children being sort of, if you like, caught by the police and things. That there's some communities that are trying to re-educate them from being attackers into defenders, just because they're so curious as people.
Very good point.
All sorts of different things make up what we need, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
just like in our sauce, we've got some oregano, we've got some oil, we've got some salt, we've got some tomatoes. All those things come together to make something greater than their individual components. And I would say it's similar with the individuals, right?
Definitely.
So I'm going to take this, put it over here on the hob so we can get it to simmer, and move on to the next step. All right, guys, so we have our sauce over there simmering. We have our base all proofed. And so now it's time to start putting these things together with some toppings. So we're going to go ahead and start off this process. We'll pick out our favorite little proofed ball here. We'll just go with this little guy. I think that looks pretty good. So we're going to throw some flour down so it doesn't stick too badly. And then we'll start working this. While I'm doing this, talk to me a little bit, right? What do you like putting on your pizzas? Today we're going to just do a basic margarita, but what's your choice here? You've talked a little bit about things you liked, but what's your go-to?
I used to like a pepperoni and meat lovers sausage type pizza, but trying to be a little healthier, and I go for a pepper and mushroom now.
Pepper and
some
mushroom.
Vegetables, yeah, sweet peppers and mushrooms.
Okay.
I'm pepperoni, double it up.
More and more pepperoni?
Yeah.
Just one type, or you got multiple types?
I don't mind a couple of types, but I like just the pepperoni on a nice base. There's a few chili flakes on top, maybe.
So we talked about pineapple at one point, and it's very, very derisive. Some folks are all about it. Some folks hate it. Is there a topping to you that's more objectionable than pineapple on a pizza?
Sweet corn.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Who would do that to themselves?
Tuna and sweet corn I've seen as well.
Really? Tuna
And
and
sweet
sweet corn
corn.
pizza.
Yeah.
That should not be allowed.
See, worse than ketchup.
Worse than ketchup. I didn't think you'd come up with it, but you did.
I'm not sure about
Not
that.
that
I think ketchup is still out there, but corn, sweet corn on a pizza is a little strange to me.
What's yours?
What's mine? Originally, I thought raisins sounded like a pretty odd thing to have on pizza. And then I had this calzone that was made with raisins. It was delicious.
Okay.
So
Raisins.
I guess the moral of the story is that you can hate stuff at face value. You can hate that pineapple. You can hate the tuna, or maybe the sweet corn. You'll be surprised often what actually ends up working out on those pizzas.
Well, I think one of the points of pizza is that you can put whatever you want on it, right? It's a good base, and then you can load it up with whatever things you like on it. So
if you're talking about loading up the pizza, right? Putting a bunch of stuff on it. Clearly, you can put too much on your pizza at times, right? Yeah. So we want to avoid those things. I think the analogy for us in cyber is that we can have far too many tools. So how do you avoid that? How do you avoid the sprawl of too many toppings or too many tools, as it were, for our situation?
I think you've got to continuously look at what tool set you have to support your strategy. Have you switched things on too soon, because that can happen, and really look at your current tool spread, and don't think of them all as cyber tools, because many tools between the rest of technology and cyber are overlapping now. I think there's more of a movement to move towards consolidation in some areas. I don't think there's a one tool fits every aspect from GRC to SIEM, but obviously there's a lot of integration now possible that wasn't possible before. And also switch on the components that matter for your business. So I've seen many times I've inherited where everything's switched on. And actually half it's not relevant, it creates lots of noise for the responders, it's expensive. So I think it's a really continued tuning, and then recognise whether you're buying a tool for a tactical reason. So it might be, I need this tool now for the first couple of years, or whether you're buying it strategically, because sometimes people don't think through that before they start spending.
Yeah, we come across that all the time, where tool consolidation is a wonderful business case, but ultimately I think it really kind of comes back to one of the first things I think we talked about, which is metrics, right? How are you measuring those key risk indicators or outcome-driven metrics of your security program? What are those needles and dials that you're looking to move? And if there's a particular metric that is not where you want it to be, or you've learned to now measure that metric because your security program's matured, or your underlying architecture has changed, you're transforming into a cloud-native company, or you've acquired a company that has different types of applications, I think you bring in tools to ultimately influence those metrics which you're defining as the efficacy of your overall program. So I think, starting with those basics, the metrics that you're looking to measure, and what is the goal of influencing those metrics by investing in another tool. As you mentioned, tool consolidation, integration, there's always an opportunity for that. And if you can save a bit of money at the same time, or save some people some time, that's great. But I think ultimately it's those key risk indicators and the metrics that you're using to measure efficacy, which are going to be driving your tool selection.
No, makes sense. You mentioned risk, right? How do you go about talking to your security teams about risk?
Quite often you end up having to sort of reset some of in my situation when I'm going sort of new or as the first cyber person or taking things over, you often have to sort of really look at the risk framework of the company, the enterprise, link it to the technology and cyber risk framework and see if it's even aligned. Simplify it as much as possible. Lots of people think they've got risks written up, but they're actually issues. That's an old server, that's happened. Risk is about what could happen, and then try and make it more relevant. To be honest, first of all, with the management team, both in technology and outside of technology, and then it's much easier to explain to your cyber teams. Cyber people like to fix things, like many technologists, and the reality is it's teaching people what I call grey. So the black and white binary ends of we fix it, we don't, most people can get, but it's basically the gradients in between of how much are we going to fix this. Gotcha. How many of the vulnerabilities we're going to fix, how much money we're going to spend on this product. Yes, there's a better singing, dancing tool out there, but the current one today does 60-70% of what we need right now. Is that good enough? And I think all of us have had to learn that over time.
Gotcha. Do you think that they're thinking about that too narrowly because they're so focused on a particular area? Or
I think it's just the biggest thing we've got to teach, CISOs need to teach their teams is we can't cure the world. You can't own it all. I think, the macro, everyone understands that, everyone will get breached one day. But the reality is, when your head's down trying to fix something, whether you're in a SOC role, and haven't got the visibility, or I need tools to help me automate, or whether you're in the consultancy end trying to work with the digital cloud team or the data science folks, it's trying to find that right balance of, grey. As I said, it's often the least worst choice we're making. And recommend to the business, not necessarily always the best choice, because you've always got a financial limitation, you've always got operational limitations, company maturity, your own team's maturity.
Gotcha. David, how do you look at that from a data perspective? You're really into metrics, you're super into quantification. How would you look at this risk aspect through kind of that lens of data?
Yeah, I think one point, just to pick up on what John said, is the overall GRC tie-in. Ultimately, it's the governance, risk, and compliance at the company level that ultimately we're looking to influence, right? It's very easy, again, as technologists, to look into that kind of binary, something's happening, I need to fix it. But ultimately, everything you do in security is as part of serving that greater goal. I think there's some frameworks out there, like the FAIR framework. There's some great books like How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity, the Metrics Manifesto, that bring that methodology to taking something that's inherently kind of difficult to measure and bringing some level of specificity to it. I think you always want to, again, come to a metric that's a number, as opposed to what sometimes is the easy way out as like the red, yellow, green, or the high, medium, and low. That can be helpful because risk inherently is sort of not necessarily a definitive number. It is a high, medium, and low type approach. But I think bringing some sort of mathematical discipline to it, to actually measuring and coming up with a number so that, is 8 good enough for something or is 6 good enough? What is the impact of going from an 8 to an 8.5? Is that significant, and does that justify an expense or an expenditure? I think is a good way of kind of bringing a little more discipline to making those types of decisions.
Gotcha. Kind of sounds like we're doing here, right? We've got our raw pizza, so to speak, and you're talking about something that's a bit more mature, formalized, kind of cooked together, so to speak, a framework.
Yeah.
So let's put a pin in that, and let's come back to it as we cook this thing and throw it into the oven.
Sounds good.
Okay, so our pizza's put together, our security program is built, and now the pressure starts, right? Now rubber hits the road, we're in reality, we're trying to make these things work in real life.
Yeah.
So we've got about 90 seconds to get through this next part. So we'll see if we can do that while this pizza cooks and come out with something that's more than delicious, right? Yeah. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this guy, and we're gonna slide it in. And here we go.
Cool.
All right, so you've both been under pressure before. How do you deal with it?
Yeah, so I won't go for the traditional incident. I had to do one of those board updates to demonstrate my program was going on track and was traveling actually between St. Cat's on the north side of Niagara and Buffalo. And as we got to the border and were let through, suddenly the customs people pulled us into a room and had everybody from every car sat in a room. And after about 30 minutes, we found out that it was because Obama was doing a tour of Buffalo and they were closing the border. I was due to do an executive update an hour away, and basically we were there for 4 hours. So the pressure was on, so I basically had to sneak to the toilets, phone my boss and say I'm not going to make the meeting.
So what's your advice for anybody else in that situation?
Don't travel between 2 countries when a president is doing his tour.
So watch for the president, watch their movements, track them, make sure it's okay.
Yeah. Be as prepared as you can. So I had contingency. I'd left 4 hours. Thinking plenty of time to travel. I'd mailed a copy of my presentation, but unfortunately my boss was a chief legal counsel, so couldn't really represent it fully for me. So I suppose always be prepared, but unfortunately stuff happens.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
So tell me about somebody who's been in a difficult situation, but was really cool under pressure.
Yeah, I had a boss who, no matter what happened, whether it was a budgetary issue, a cyber incident, or just behaviours of people, as you often get in organisations, no matter what, he always was very steady and even keel. Because I got to know him quite well, it worked for me, because I was able to pretty much get my frustrations out without him reacting. But on the other hand, other people sometimes found it a bit off-putting because they weren't sure actually what his reaction really was.
Mm.
Gotcha. All right, well, we've had our 90. Let's see how this looks. I think we're almost there. I actually think we need a tad bit more time on this guy.
Cool.
David, any perspective on that? Any bonus to add for folks you've seen stay cool under pressure?
Yeah, I mean, I think as John said, be prepared for every eventuality that you can think of, but be prepared for the ones you can't think of. Mm-hmm. And I think something might come out of left field and might not be something that you've prepared for, but have contingencies in place for that type of scenario, even though you don't know what's coming. And that, I think, is one of the big challenges, really.
No, it makes perfect sense. So we're just going to throw some basil on here, and we're going to go ahead and cut this up and give it a shot, see how we did.
All right.
See if our security program is mature and good, or if we forgot to do some preparation.
I'm glad you're holding that and I'm not. It's a lethal knife.
It looks a little bit scary, doesn't it? Take your pick.
Which bit's not going to burn me? That one.
There you go.
Thank you.
This one's
looking
good.
Like Well done, chef. Am I allowed ketchup with it?
Only if you're going to dip. Maybe some ranch. Unlike pizza, we basically can't always know when something goes wrong, right? We have to be able to find ways to track, to know when it's good. I mean, clearly when a pizza's bad, you can tell it's bad. How do you know your security program is a good one without having to have that big, gigantic incident?
I think it's basically continuously looking at what you're doing. Is it what you're committed to do? Are the threats still the relevant ones? We mentioned earlier about businesses can change, the environment can change, fires can happen. So I think it's just that continual measure. As we mentioned, it's a real continuous journey. So it's not that one-off snapshot. I think there's more possibility now to do much more real-time measuring, visibility with the different technologies around, and that really helps you be able to course correct much faster.
Gotcha. No, it makes perfect sense. So what are the lessons learned? Like what's your big takeaways? How would you kind of sum some of that up?
I think we've all agreed, metrics are important. I think brings the objectivity, and I think one of the other elements I think we've kind of touched on, but is getting buy-in from all relevant parties, right? As technologists, as security people, we can have a perspective, but ultimately other folks in the organization need to agree on those same objectives. Or maybe they disagree and we can have a conversation around it. So I think getting that broad buy-in, metrics I think help do that, because as you define them, then everybody understands what 8 means and what 4 means. And it's getting that broad agreement of what does success look like and how do we measure towards that.
Gotcha. John, any?
I think you've got to be consistent in that thematic. If you think of like a comic book strip over a sort of series of magazines, you've got this underlying thread of the story and the key characters, but the story changes each week. So you've got to keep that going for everyone. And then you've got to be quite sort of persistent. And I'll say resilient in terms of, you're going to have setbacks, you're going to have failures. You're going to have to say this part of the program didn't work in that region. Can I think of doing it in a different way? Because you're dealing with a combination of people, processes, and not just the tech.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Well, I appreciate the input today. It's been wonderful having you all here.
Great, thanks for the pizza.
Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, thank you.
And the pizza came out good.
Yeah. Well, I guess we got a good security program.
We do.
Thank you.
All right, thanks guys. Thank you so much for joining us, and a huge thank you to AWS, our sponsor who let us put this on today. If you'd like to learn more about cybersecurity and pizza, head to systigslice.com. If you'd like to learn just more about cybersecurity, hit up sysdig.com. Thanks so much for your time.